So we have Jim here, Jim Simmons. Hi, Jim. Jim and I think we've known each other for 10 years. We started the very same day our software developer roles at Focusrite.
Yeah.
So that was in 2010.
Is that really 10 years?
I think it was 2010, wasn't it?
Oh,
So it's been a while, and I moved on before you, but then you had several other experiences, and then you set out to build VR. And I'm very curious, what made you move from VR? Because you worked for Yamaha before Focusrite. You're a musician. You studied at Tonmeister, if I'm remember correctly.
Yeah.
So VR is kind of a different world. You come at it from a very strong music background. What made you interested in that world?
Well, I'm always interested in what's at the cutting edge technology-wise, and especially in terms of user interfaces. And so I was very interested when all the touchscreens came out with iOS, which is probably about 12 years ago now, and iPad was 10 years. And VR really is the next step in user interface design. And there's a huge scope for potential for doing lots of different things with music in VR and in AR in the longer term, which is kind of all bunched together in the term spatial computing. And there's a whole new paradigm of how you build 3D interfaces and interact with virtual instruments, which is just very exciting. And when I first got a VR setup and started testing whether it was good to develop in, I could see that it's a much more immersive thing than just using a desktop or even using pads to create music. You really lose yourself in the environment much more. And also we found that user testing with other people, they kind of say the same thing. You really lose yourself in creation. So yeah, that's what attracted me to it, and what made me continue making products in it.
Great. So I mean, the VR space is massively dominated by experiences of 3D cinema, I suppose, and mostly games. I mean, the only places where you can buy 3D or headset VR applications are Oculus Rift store and the Steam store. So I suppose you had to kind of adapt your experience with that audience, an audience of gamers as opposed to an audience of musicians.
Absolutely, although it is targeted at musicians very much, Tranzient, as opposed to there are music games out there and that are very successful. There's a whole genre called rhythm game, which is generally stuff flying at you that you hit in time to the music. The most successful being Beat Saber. In fact, that's probably the most successful VR game of the last year or 2 years. So that's targeted at gamers who don't want to create. And what I want to make or I want my users to enjoy creating music as opposed to gaming. So there is a crossover there in that most of the people on Steam are definitely gamers. People on Oculus is a bit slightly different, and the biggest market is still gamers, and that's really because most people want to strap a headset on and shoot things. But there is a lot of fun to be had in creating things. You can see actually in the success of Tilt Brush, which is a visual creative app where you're painting in 3D effectively, and you've got different brushes, and that's an incredibly successful app, and that's for creative people and not a game as such at all. So there is a niche in there for non-gamers. It's a very different culture in terms of reviewing and that kind of side of it. Yeah, that's funny.
Great. Well, I can see in the comments someone saying that they want VR Ableton, and I suppose it's kind of time to get into the demo. And I think if they want VR Ableton, I think you can give them a bit of a ride there. So
yes,
yeah, over to you then for the demo.
Awesome. I'm going to hide my mug and then talk through it a bit. So you should now see an avatar of me. I'm waving here. So this is called embodiment in VR, where I'm inside an avatar, and this is how I will be perceived by other people in social VR or multiplayer. So you can join other people in this environment. In terms of the music, what I'm trying to build is something close to a controllerist workflow or an Ableton workflow, but not yet a DAW. And the reason for that is you're not going to sit in VR for 10 hours tweaking things. It's not at that point of comfort yet. One day it will be. So really this is about live jamming, live looping, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to do now, this is a virtual in-game camera. I'm going to switch so that you see what I see. So now you're seeing what my eyes see in the environment. And just so you see, in terms of gaming, it is a bit like a game in that you can fly around, go anywhere, jump around, which means you've got kind of infinite real estate to put your instruments or whatever you're building. So we're going to start over here. So what we've got is an analogy to the Ableton session view. So we've got a load of clips arranged into scenes. So if I play this scene here, it'll trigger all these clips on the quantized point. Just move around a bit so you can see. Now if I trigger another scene, play the next scene, just like you would in Ableton or any other kind of looping, live looping app. So that's the simplest level of building up a tune with a lot of loops put together. You can turn individual clips on and off just like you would in Ableton. Turn another scene on. And because this is a 3D arrangement, anything can be kind of minimized or maximized. You can minimize the entire session like that. Now it's about this size. Previously it was about the size of my height when I open it up again. And also, just like in Ableton, you'd have MIDI clips and audio clips. So you'd have a step sequencer embedded as a clip. And because it's a 3D user interface, I can open that out and it pops out in front of me. So I can edit things in place rather than having to have a separate window, which is like your MIDI editor or whatever. You can just zoom things in and out as part of the inherent in the interface, which is quite nice because then everything's in one place. Let's just stop that for a sec. So each of these clips is has its own effects that you can add, which can be either VST effects or built-in effects. So I could add a filter to this loop. You can hear that taking effect. And the idea is that everything's centered around the clips or the instruments. So clips have their own effects, instruments have their own effects. And there's no mixer as such. You do everything at a clip level. And if I trigger this entire scene, I can also add effects to the entire scene. So that scene's not got effects on it. This one has. So it's kind of groups within groups. And here you've got something that owns the entire stack of scenes. At the same way, if I trigger something without effects on, I could add the same effect at this level. And that applies to everything in here. So hey, effectively now got two filters on top of each other because there's one here, one there, there's one there. So that's the kind of highest level, which is a bit like a session view of how you can put scenes together and clips together. You can, everything is completely drag and drop. So I could grab this scene here, pull it out. So now this is completely independent. A bit hard, let's move it over here. It's completely independent of the rest of this stack. And it will have pulled out away from this effect in here. And I could add it here. So now I've got a scene inside a song, if that makes sense. So you can stack things up inside and it'll play just like a clip would. And I can pop that out, a bit harder to see in 3D, and pop it back in again. So it's very easy to edit stuff at any level in this hierarchy. So that's clips and scenes. Also supported are VST synths. There's also an internal synth. So here, I've got a push-like interface. So you can choose the scale and the key, and there's actually a global setting, so everything will run at the same key tempo. And what I'm doing there, I'm controlling pitch bend with a button on my left controller. So in VR, you've got controllers that you hold, which are a bit like a PlayStation controller almost, but one for each hand. And I've assigned pitch bend to be the rotate on the left hand. I've assigned filter as the left to right when I press this control button on my right hand. So you can assign any VST parameter to the different control parameters in 3D, so roll, rotate, or moving things around axes. And it becomes quite a physical thing to play the music. And also, because this is a VST, the VST UI is mirrored into VR. So here I can grab cutoff filter or generally directly edit the sound. So I can load up another preset. So this is a VST3 plugin by Yuhi. Let's load another preset. And what I've also done is after the synth, I've added a VST audio effect plugin. So this already had a reverb loaded on it, which is this Arturia reverb. You can edit this as well in VR. So if I turn it up, the dry wet right up, it's like super echoey. And again, I can map any of these parameters like the dry wet or whatever to my hand motion. Let's just turn the dry wet down a bit. So what I'm going to do now is just record a little bit of that with a click, just a tiny riff. So it's recorded auto quantized there. I'll turn the click off. And that will be in sync with the clips. What I'm going to do now is record some of that motion I've got mapped in terms of filters and pitch bend. So if I turn on record parameters here, and record a little bit of pitch bend. I just did that then. I'm going to record a filter. Oops, went too far. So you can overlay automation and melodies. And you can pull these notes out into any arrangement you want because you've got complete freedom of movement. You obviously wouldn't be able to do if you had a push or whatever, unless you've got a hatchet. And these are all velocity sensitive, so you can hit them. I'll put those back. And everything in this VR world is completely scalable. So I've now just made this about the size, about the height of a bus. Or I can scale it right back down, bring it up close, make it about the size of a launch pad. So you've got complete control over how you lay things out in the world, which you just wouldn't have with physical devices. So the next thing I do is I'll trick some of these loops again. So because this is VR, you can also have visuals synced to the music. So I set up here a couple of screens, and you can see the videos synced up to the music. And in fact, if I grab the click and let's slow it down, the audio will time stretch and everything's still in sync. So both visuals and audio, everything follows a global tempo. So the last thing I'm going to show you is drum programming. So I'll turn this off. So here I've loaded a kit of electronic drum sounds. You can browse the kits. This is little miniature kind of 3D versions. So I could load up more acoustic kit. And to program this up using a step sequence, all you do is choose which drum you're programming. And then play it. So that's 4x4 to the floor sort of thing. And I've just selected the hi-hat there. You very quickly build up patterns just like you would with a push or whatever. Or record them in real time, including velocity. If I get another click up, let's go a bit fast for a sec. That's auto quantized. And recorded the velocity as well. Take that one slightly off. To actually see what's going on there, I'll turn cables on and see which drum is connected to what. So you can build up a tune or a kind of live jam between audio loops, VST synths, VST effects, and drum programming. And it's all, you can turn quantize on and off and that kind of thing. And it's got swing quantize. And you've also got a full kind of tagged clip library. So I choose something like bass music and audition a loop here. And when I decide I like it, I can open it and pull it out into the world. bring out another loop. I'll drag these together, start building up scenes, just like over here. I think that's a pretty good time to stop walking through it and see if anyone wants to ask any questions.
Well, I have some questions, and we would welcome questions from internet as well. So, I mean, first, congratulations! It's very impressive. It feels like a full dog, but in VR. So, if I understand correctly, you build that yourself with no extra help.
Yes, yeah. It's a one-man band company at the moment. Yeah.
Well, that's very impressive.
Thanks.
One thing that VR is great for is social interaction as well, especially in times of lockdown where we can't actually see each other physically. So is that feature implemented for Tranzient as well?
Yes, absolutely. So you can choose from about 20 avatars, which are your character, and it follows your body language in terms of pointing, arms, thumbs, mouth animation, and voice over IP. And you can join up to 8 people, and you can trigger near real-time things together. So turning steps on and off, starting, stopping clips, that kind of thing. You can collaborate, or you can just play. One person can play to the other people what they're working on, chat about it, a bit like a mini gig, I suppose, or invite people to your sitting room. Or you can just turn up and chat to each other about music. Oops, quite nice. I just lost the camera there. So that's something that you wouldn't be able to do anywhere else than VR or AR in the longer term. So I can meet someone in New York or anywhere and join them in VR, chat to them, listen to what they're working on.
Well, this is great. So we have a question from Pat. What is the computer hardware?
So I'm running on a GTX 1070. What you need for VR is a very good graphics card. So 1060 is a kind of minimum, and that's like a gaming graphics card. I can't remember what my Intel processor is. It's the best processor from about 3 years ago. But gaming PC, basically, to do high-end VR.
Okay. And so I understand you've built this with the Unreal Engine, and looking at the distance, I'm not a game. I don't know very much how game works in terms of the audio engine, but it looks to me that you had some great things to say about the backend audio API that Unreal has recently updated. So you didn't have to use any other engine. You just use the audio engine offered in the Unreal Engine. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So the Unreal Engine audio team, about probably 3 years ago, actually started rewriting the entire audio backend. So it's all brand new architecture using the latest features or whatever, C++. And because it's an open source thing, the Unreal Engine, I've gone in then and changed its behavior to work more like the backend of Ableton Live is. So there's a bit of work to do. There was a bit of work to do there, but for the most part, their backend does nearly everything you need to do. Because it's designed for gaming, it's designed for filing lots of clips in parallel, that kind of thing, and spatial sound, because that's what you get in games, binaural or HTRF based. So there's a huge amount in there that's already really useful for doing multi-channel audio.
Well, that's very cool, and I hope that we can get a chance to go under the hood of your program, and you can share that to us in a moment. We have another question coming from Adam from Berlin. He says, "Great demo. Could you host a gig in this or export 360 video for upload?"
There's a couple of things there. It's very easy to export a feed like you were watching to YouTube or Twitch or whatever, or do a live feed. In terms of 360, it's that the performance is not good enough to capture 360 live. You can use the game engine to record what you've done and then render it in non-real time in 360. There's just too much to render. to do it real time. You can take a high-res snapshots as well quite easily in the game. But in terms of 360, you can't do that out of the box. It's just not, the performance isn't there. And was there a second part to that question?
Well, the question is, can you also host a gig in this? I mean, is it possible
gig,
to perform and play live?
So you'd play live to 8 other people, so not a giant gig. And the reason for that is at the moment the multiplayer runs peer-to-peer, which means whoever hosts the room, in effect, their broadband connection is the bottleneck, and you'll get about 8 VoIP feeds on your kind of 30 megabit or over connection. And there's plenty of scope for deploying this app to run on with many more users if you just deploy it in the cloud to a game host, a gaming server. But then that costs lots of money, so I'm not doing that at the moment. It's totally possible, but it's not doing at the
moment. So would you like to show us a little bit how the Unreal Engine and the audio backend works?
Yeah, so what I was going to show you first was the thing that really makes Unreal powerful is its scripting language. So I'm going to load up a simple project and just show you how the scripting language works. And then I'll load up my project. In terms of the audio engine, most of that is C++, so I don't really want to go too deep into that. It's a bit hardcore. So I'll just show you the scripting. Let's see if I can get this up on the screen. So I'll just minimize myself a bit. So this is Unreal Engine, for people who aren't aware of it, and it's a game engine, and it's free. You pay a royalty if you use it commercially. And you've got a 3D scene, which you can fly through and add things and remove things. This is like the default empty scene. And just like Photoshop or something like that, you've got a bunch of objects and you can have layers that you manipulate inside this scene and drag and drop around. And each of these things has properties. So at that level, when you're building a world or adding items, it's a drag and drop, fairly easy to use thing. On a deeper level, the scripting language, which is called Blueprint, pretty much mirrors everything you could do with an object-oriented development language like C++ or C#. Not everything, but pretty much everything. So that's what I'm going to show you now, is just building up some objects to show how easy it is in that respect. So when you're creating a good architecture of objects in C++, the first thing you'd start with, if you already know what you want to do, is an interface. So there, I just added a new interface. I'll just show you that again, because I went a bit fast. There's lots of things you can add. So I created a new interface, and I'm going to call this my drum. And if I double click this, I can add a simple function like hit the drum, which takes velocity or something like that, and returns did it work. So that's a floating point velocity and the bool in. So the reason I'm doing this is just to show how quick it is and graphical it is to build something you would normally do in a lower level programming language. There you go, I've defined a function, an interface, and that's exactly the same as an interface definition in C++ or C#. So what I would now do is add an object that I want to implement in that interface. So I'm going to create a new object called drum, bass actually, let's call it. And I open that and I say, what interface do you want to implement? I want to iDrum. And if you look here, there's a lot to see for a new person, but I'm just trying to take you through it quickly. You can see that it's added that function that I created in the interface, hit the drum. So in there, at the moment, I'm just going to do print string. Hello. Well, I'll just print the velocity. And I'll return true. So very quickly, I've just built something you would normally build in C++. And you don't have to, there is a very fast compile, but it's pretty much instant to run it. And now imagine I wanted to create a specialization of drum like snare drum. I just right click on the drum and bass, go create child, and choose snare drum. So I've now created a child class that inherits functionality and the interface from that drum and bass. And then, oops, I can go directly into the functions here and override, hit the drum, the thing that I defined in the interface. And you can choose to call up to the parent, just like you would, or base class, just like you would, C#, C++. Or I get rid of that and I put my own custom handler in here. Snare noise. Or I could return that it didn't work. So that shows, it's a very quick demo to show that you can do exactly the kind of design patterns that you would do in C++, but all graphically very fast. No compiling, no kind of syntax errors, and everything's, it's very easy to rename things and that kind of thing, because everything's referenced, cross-referenced. On top of that, you've got very easy to use program flow, like a for loop, something like that. And this is, it becomes a bit like other graphical programming languages. So I could go from 1 to 3, print snare noise 3 times, at the end, return. And if I wanted to refactor that, I can select a couple of things like that and go collapse. Actually, let's just, yeah, so collapse to function. That's put it in its own little function, handle hit, just for doing that job. So you can create very neat behavior that's broken down into functions, classes, interfaces, all that stuff that makes large code bases and things maintainable. And Tranzient, probably about 90% of it is built like that. And it's quite an intense app, actually, Tranzient, with the amount of audio stuff going on and the multiplayer. And it's made it a lot faster doing all that in scripting. The other 20% is quite hardcore, diving into giant code base underneath. But you can see, I hope you can see from that you can very quickly start experimenting and prototyping things. That's about it, really. Any questions on that?
Well, that's incredible. I mean, it reminds me of Max a little bit, but with within a bigger environment and connecting things at a larger scale. And I suppose my question there is, how much? I mean, you have over 20 years experience as a developer, but someone with less experience, how quickly could they get started with Unreal Engine to code either VR or audio applications?
I think if you want to start prototyping VR or audio that's not like a DAW, so if you just want to trigger a few sounds, or it's got a built-in synth as well. So if you want to start manipulating a synth at a simpler level than what Tranzient does, it's relatively quick to start experimenting, and you don't have to get into their code base. As soon as you start getting into the Unreal Engine code base, it's much slower because it takes like 40 minutes to build it, and it's huge. But there's a version of Unreal which doesn't involve any building of C++. You just download it as an engine, which is what you should do if you want to start out. And you can quickly start, you can very easily create spaghetti in it as well, but you can quickly start building prototypes. And if you go to, there's things called game jams, which is a bit like the hack space for gamers. And there people very quickly knock things together, and it's a great place to learn skills.
Cool. We have a question from Bellandino asking about a gestural control. So do you have any plans to add like Oculus Quest head tracking or improve the way the gesture is considered to control audio processes?
I think on PC, so the Quest, I have an alpha running on Quest, but I haven't spent a long time on that yet optimizing it. It's a much harder device to target. It basically works. The hand tracking on Quest though is nowhere near good enough for music yet, and it's just not responsive. It's slow, and ultimately camera tracking is generally slow of things like hands, as opposed to controllers like these. They have effectively markers on them that are seen by the camera, so they can track fast. But when you're trying to track actual hands with the camera, it's not as quick, and so you can't really play drums properly, that kind of level of latency yet. At some point they'll get the tracking good. May not happen on the first Quest. So the short answer is no. And in terms of the tracking on PC, it's already very fully implemented. Really, you've got 6 degrees of freedom. There's a chance it might be worth putting in something like the Wikinator thing, where you could machine learn a specific shape or something, and say that specific shape changes the reverb to delay, or you could map it to anything really. So there's scope for maybe doing that on the PC version, and building your own library of trigger gestures that do things beyond just direct. There you go. Direct beyond just the direct mapping to parameters.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. So, so how long did it take you to from start to release?
First product was 3 months actually from. So I created this Ableton Live controller. I'm just going to mute. There's stuff going on in the background. It's like getting in the way. Can you still hear me?
Yep, cool. Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. I just turned off there's Oculus stuff jumping up at me. What's the question again? I've just been distracted now.
I was wondering, because it's such a big software. I was wondering how long it took you to go from the initial idea to releasing.
Yeah. So the first product I made was an Ableton Live controller, which controlled Ableton via MIDI, and was just a bolt-on VR user interface. Took 3 months, and that was really to learn how to use the VR technology. And that was very quick because it's just sending MIDI messages. This Tranzient took about a year from starting to release point, and that was released early to market, really minimum viable product, and then has been developed further for the last kind of 6-7 months.
That seems incredibly fast. We've had a follow-up question from Bellandino, who asked a question about the Oculus Quest. He's asking, how about external devices such as Kinect Leap Motion mounted on the headset? I suppose as an additional control to the hands.
Yes, I mean there's actually in not on the Quest, but in my previous product, the Ableton controller, I added Leap Motion support to that. So you could use the entire app, and you bolt the Leap Motion. Let's just make my face bigger because I don't need to see Unreal. You bolt the Leap Motion on here, and there's an API which maps into Unreal, and you can pick things up like that. It's just a kind of pinch gesture, and move blocks around and hit things. It's not as real time as these. It's just not as real time because it's a camera. On Quest, I've no idea. I don't think you can plug a Leap Motion into a Quest or connect into a Quest because it's got its own. It's got USB 3 on it, but I don't think it's supported at all. It's Android, and then it's locked down by Oculus, as far as I know. So you can't with the Quest, unless you'd have to plug it into a PC and then you'd have to route it over Wi-Fi, route the tracking stuff over Wi-Fi to the Quest. A bit of a specialist hack.
So we have a question as well, just coming up. Where can we find and try? I suppose the question is about Tranzient.
So just to search for Tranzient or Google it, and you'll find it on the Oculus Store or Steam Store. $19.99, £15.50. Buy it now. That's my sales spiel. I'm not an actual salesperson.
I will bring up the links. If you have a headset and you want to try Tranzient, I will put up the link to the Oculus Rift store and the Steam store. So I have some other random questions. If there's not, and I will bring more as they come in from the chat. So
No.
I'm curious about your customers, like people who buy Tranzient. What do you know about them? I mean, are they musicians or are they gamers curious about making music? I wonder who you made it for, and then whether the market is actually who you thought it was going to be.
Yes, primarily I made it for musicians who want to do controllerist style things, so electronic music creators, and I'd say 80% of the people are those people. There's also some YouTubers really getting into it who are less, they're kind of learning how to produce music whilst using Tranzient, so they didn't actually know how to produce music before. And so they're kind of learning a new interface, having never used Ableton or any of that stuff, which is very interesting to watch. And you can see people progressing and getting better at making music. And they're, because it's a visual medium, they're then posting their work visually as videos on YouTube of them making tunes and stuff. It's quite cool.
What are the features that you are looking to build next? Is there like a big one that you are thinking of or working on at the moment?
There's two things. The biggest one is to get it onto Quest, because that's the biggest platform. Well, that and PlayStation. But PlayStation Move controller's not so good for music yet. Maybe what happens with PlayStation 5 might be better. But so I really want to get it on Quest, but there's issues there because Oculus are being very picky about what they allow on the store for the Quest. So it's really about getting something so polished and so performant that they let it on their store, which can take some time to do, and it has to be done in collaboration with them, actually. Second thing, or the next, it's not a major thing, it's the next main thing is what you were looking at when I was demoing. You're looking at me use sliders and 2D-ish interfaces to manipulate the parameters. And I've now built something which is much more like a 3D equivalent of plugin interfaces. A nice 3D giant Bakelite knobs that you'd get on a giant rack mount compressor or whatever. So things that start to look like real world studio devices. Because it's a lot more fun to use interfaces like that than it is to kind of just use the standard flat sliders and things. So that'll be the next feature I roll out soon on the PC. But Quest is the main focus, actually.
Okay, and I suppose related to the question that Adam asked earlier about performance, and at the moment I understand it's limited to 8 people. The 8 people will join in together in the session. But how about interconnection with other software? Could you export what you've built in Tranzient and continue to build it or produce it in Logic or Live or any other project?
You can export a stereo WAV out of it. So at the moment it's not massively automated. So you basically do start export and then start and stop whatever loops you want to take out, and it'll do a stereo render of it. So you can take out the stems. It takes a few clicks to do it. Yeah.
I see. Okay. And so the people who are using it and interacting socially, how do they interact mostly? Is it a place where they build an environment together where they work together, or is it more like come and watch me doing a performance? What are the interactions like?
And first thing I say is that there aren't a huge number of people getting into the social side of it yet. It has to be said, and I'm not really sure why that is. It may be that people really don't want to expose themselves musically to other people yet on what they're working on, or whatever. But the people who are going online with each other are more chatting about stuff, really chatting about what they're working on, I think, rather than doing some sort of collaborative gig. I think over time, as more and more people get into VR and get used to social VR, that'll change. That's what I believe, anyway.
Okay. So one last question for me, which is more like zooming back into to look at VR as a medium for music creation, and for the people who were listening and out there who are interested in starting, combining the VR technology with the possibility of making music. What do you think are the biggest opportunities in the future for them to work on if they want to start something new? What are the things that you would recommend to look at, but also conceptually, what are the main use cases that you feel people should start working on?
Are you talking about people developing VR products or people making music in VR?
Well, a bit of both, but I'm thinking most people coming onto the music hack space are makers themselves, and I think they could be inspired by what you're doing, and really useful to have your take and sense of on what opportunities are laying around for music and VR from the developer's perspective.
There's a couple of things. The latest version of Unreal actually has lots of audio visualization functionality built in, and there's a big scope there to do some really interesting kind of crossover between VJing and music creation, especially if you're just into hacking the visuals and the audio or music together, and using the game engine to do that. There's a massive scope there for doing some incredible reactive visuals. They've built in all the kind of they call it synesthesia, their plugin, as in color to sound sort of thing. And there's another thing in there called Niagara, which is about visual effects and particles flying around, all that kind of stuff, smoke, all those things. And you can feed all that audio analysis information and mash it up with the visual effects. There's a big scope for creativity there for someone to create something very interesting. I'd love to add that as well, Tranzient, but I've got a few other things to worry about at the moment. The other thing actually I'd love to do with Tranzient is turn it into a mod kit. So in game engine world, the mod kit is where traditionally they've allowed people to build extra levels for their shoot 'em up or whatever game, and allowed the customer base to generate more maps or more worlds or whatever it is they add. And there's a kind of already a built-in architecture for creating or opening up a platform to allow people the end users to add to it. And so I'd love with Tranzient actually to allow people to add their own instruments and their own effects and anything really that they want to add to it and publish it to the community. It's all totally doable. It's just about time really. And that would make the music hack space kind of person, it would give them very quick access to build whatever kind of Frankenstein visual musical instrument they want, just by kind of inheriting from one of my like synth classes or whatever. Be very easy to extend it.
Great market. So we have another question from Anna Morphin. Would be interesting to have a possibility as in hardware to meet as a group of musicians, share sessions like that. Well, it's not as much a question, but I suppose there is an interest for in-person meetings to explore possibilities of VR. That's what I understand, especially on the hardware side. So on the hardware side, what can you what have you observed in terms of all the hardware components? And I'm just not just limiting to the headset, but obviously there's this leap motion as well. This is a range of hardware dependencies, which is kind of a gate to using VR, because you need to buy the headset to actually use any of this. What's your
Yes.
reflection on all of this different hardware and how creative we can get with that as well?
I think really that there's two things. There's kind of the hacking thing, where people are happy to cross all those boundaries themselves because they want to tinker or mess around with stuff. Mass market is standalone headsets, and the Quest really is world beating. There's nothing else to compete with it, and that's just where it's at, and it's where it's going to be at probably until the Quest 2, unless a amazing competitor comes along. I don't think there will be an amazing competitor. I think they've really got a massive market lead. So the Quest is where it's at really, and boundary there is price, 400 quid. Presumably or hopefully economies of scale will kick in at some point and that'll get cheaper. But that's got everything you need really.
Right. Okay. Well, so there is interest to gig and to perform and to meet in person or maybe online. So maybe we can follow up on that. And thank you, Anna, for asking that question.
Sure.
And Jim, I invite you, if you want to offer to a small group of people the possibility to do that and participate and get some feedback as well. We'd be very happy to put you in touch with the people who are interested in doing that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, get a few people together in social. Yeah.
Great. So I don't have any more questions. I don't see any more in the chat. Would you like to offer a few last words of wisdom in your journey of building Tranzient?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, number one thing is in terms of perceiving what I'm demonstrating or any other VR music creation app, you really have to try it to understand it rather than watching it on a 2D screen. You can get it a bit, but if you get the chance, if you have a VR headset or a friend has a VR headset, try this stuff for yourself rather than watching the videos. It's completely different when you're immersed in it. In terms of development, I'd say the mistake I made was all the blueprint stuff I was demonstrating to you. I assumed it was much simpler than doing code development, and so I made less well-structured stuff for quite a while. So the thing if I was talking to myself and going back in history, I'd say just do exactly the same design and stuff you did with C++ and copy it in this scripting language, and then everything's great. And I didn't do that to start with. It was a bit messy. So that's what I'll say to anyone else who's adopting a visual language is follow the disciplines of coding.
Great. Well, so thank you very much. If there's anything you want to share on the Music Hackspace forum, I think that's a place where we want people to engage after the event, and then you can meet with them directly and engage with them. So if there's any content, any access, I invite you to go to forum.musichackspace.org and share any materials or follow-ups from this seminar.
Cool.
Well, thank you. It was really interesting to see and how deep your sequencer in VR has gone through. So congratulations.
Thanks and thanks very much for hosting and inviting. Much appreciated.
My pleasure. Great. Well, thank you to everybody who followed live and who asked questions. And I'll see you next week. All right.
Everyone.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.